Kurt Cobain failed to understand the one thing above all that made the Beatles truly great.
Am I gonna do this by myself?
His creative process was very, very solitary. Nirvana wasn't a band like the Beatles. Kurt didn't understand the power of the bond and the relationship between McCartney and Lennon. If you like music, stories about music and musicians, welcome. From an early age, toddler, 3, 4 years old, his mom would spin Beatles records, and young Kurt would connect immediately to the music. One of the things that makes the Beatles so great is that their music talks to all ages. They even have literally children's songs, like the Ringo songs. So the Beatles have the ability to hook you in and connect to you really early on. And that was the case with Kurt. Young Kurt heard it, and he was trapped by the magic. And after the music, which came first, came the imagery. And the image that stuck with him the most was that of John Lennon. John Lennon was cool. John Lennon was sarcastic. John Lennon was the prototype of what a rock star is today. He was smart, he was wry, he was sarcastic, he was bitter, and he was charismatic, especially towards male audiences. He had an irreverence and he had a defiance of authority that really appeals to young rebellious. And he carried that the way he looked, and he carried that the way he sang, with his raspier lyrics. And Kurt hooked onto that image from a very early age, 4-year-old kid banging on toy drums and thinking, hey, I want to be like that one day. And the more he learned about Lennon, which wasn't a lot because remember, this is pre-internet days, our information was limited, but the more he learned about Lennon, the more he liked it. And the more he saw the similarities to himself. For example, Lennon's abilities to draw and express himself through visual art, which Kurt did as well. So that was a role model for him from really, really early on. Everyone knows about Cobain's love for the Beatles. He made it public, but he also famously said that he hated Paul McCartney. There's an interview where he says, I love the Beatles, I fucking hate Paul McCartney. I get why. In many ways, John Lennon was cool, but actually that means warm and passionate and fire. Paul McCartney is cool in the way that he's unshakable, the way that he doesn't really show his emotions very much, the way that he's a closed book. Paul McCartney, personality-wise, is a little bit more, not a little bit more, a lot more opaque. You don't really know what he's thinking, and maybe he's not thinking that much more. You just want to read more into it. But he's composed, he's thoughtful, but when it comes to emotion, he doesn't show too much of it. Although the man writes a mean love ballad, and in fact, he had a different kind of charisma than Lennon that I think appealed more to the females. All the girls loved Paul in the early days. He was called the handsome Beatle. There was something calming about him. There was something stable about him, which actually really appealed to girls and really rubbed Kurt Cobain the wrong way. Paul McCartney was almost the anti-rock star, or at least for young Kurt Cobain in the early 70s, that's what he would know. He'd be famous for example, that Maxwell's Silver Hammer was a McCartney song. And that was a really annoying song as far as I was concerned. It was nonsensical. It was supposed to be whimsical and childish, and I'm like, not cool. And I think that was John's perception of McCartney. And again, I'll admit it was mine as well. So famously early on, age 7 or something, he puts on a show for his family in the living room, Kurt that is, banging on his drums and singing Hey Jude, dressed up as John Lennon. So it's really ironic, of course. We know that Hey Jude is a Paul McCartney song, But he wouldn't have known that at the time. All of the Lennon-McCartney songs were credited together for songwriting. Kurt loved Hey Jude. He connected to it musically. As a young child, he was performing it. I mean, Hey Jude is a great song, really catchy. And he was dressing up as John Lennon already, pretending to be John Lennon playing Hey Jude, not realizing the irony that not only Hey Jude was written by Paul McCartney, it was written about John Lennon's son that his father was neglectful towards. And McCartney was actually singing a love song to Lennon's son. And there is kind of an echo here between, I think, Kurt and his daughter, Frances, being later on. There's a certain irony to it. I fucking hate Paul McCartney, but the first song I perform is a Paul McCartney song. A better example, and the one that we have a recording of, is And I Love Her. So this is the only song, as far as I know, a recording of a song that we have of Kurt Cobain performing a Beatles song, a cover of a Beatles song. It's a hauntingly beautiful cover. I'm going to put a link in the notes so you can listen to it if you haven't heard it before, because it's beautiful. It's just so Cobain-like, and it's imperfect, and he gets, some notes wrong. I don't know if on purpose or not, but it has a dissonance to it that's just perfect. I get why he picked that song. There's something about the music of it that is really haunting. So it's a love ballad, a very simple love ballad lyrically. It's got this almost slightly Latin-like beat to it, but the chords, I think the very simple chords, at least in the verse, are minor chords, and they're kind of dark chords. So there's tension over there. This tension that's very Lennon-like, that's very Cobain-like, but it's a McCartney creation. In the second verse, there's kind of an arpeggio going over the guitar, lifting it up within that minor sensation. And it creates this really eerie and beautiful image. It's when he says, bright are the stars that shine, dark as the sky. First of all, the contrast. I mean, it's so simple, but the contrast of these two things, that's just immediately fires up a picture in your brain. Anyway, you know the part that I'm talking about. To me, that really lifts up the song to a new level. I can just imagine Kurt latching onto this song, this beauty, this simple expression of love, and recording his own version, loving it, and I'm sure fully convinced that that was a John Lennon song. He didn't have the benefit of the internet, where we all, or at least I, obsessively looked which song was written by who, which song was sang by who. I really wanted to know those things. Back then you had to guess. There's one more thing that occurred to me about John Lennon as Kurt Cobain's role model, and that's John Lennon's martyrdom. See, when I grew up, John Lennon was dead. I mean, he died when I was 2 years old. But Kurt must have been like 12, 13, 14, something like that, when the headlines came. John Lennon was murdered. That shocking picture of the glasses, shattered glasses, blood all over the place. That kind of news, at that age, has got to leave a deep, deep mark on a person. Just like Kurt's death, when I was around 16, left a really deep mark on me. And I just remember that day with the newspapers, the front cover, Kurt Cobain dead. That shock. And you forget that Kurt experienced that. And in his forming mind, somewhere deep inside, I think he was thinking, hey, to be a truly great artist, you have to die. And that might have been nested deep in his mind and led him all the way to his own suicide. And that's another reason to fucking hate Paul McCartney. Because Paul McCartney survived, and he thrived, and he's still around today, way past Kurt Cobain himself. Kurt Cobain was a loner. His creative process was very, very solitary. All of it was in his head. He had a creative genius, but he bore a huge burden on himself because Nirvana wasn't a band like the Beatles. And that's what Kurt didn't get. Kurt didn't understand the power of the bond and the relationship and the dependency between McCartney and Lennon. As much machismo as John Lennon had, the first time he met Paul McCartney and he heard him play, he's like, yo, this kid is good. I need more of that in my life. I need to open myself up to that. And there was back and forth, and there was competition, and there was support. And it didn't last very long, but it lasted longer than Nirvana. In his sordid mind, Kurt thought that John Lennon was carrying the entire weight of the world on his shoulders. The entire weight of the music, of the creation on his shoulders, because he failed to see Paul McCartney's contribution. And so, when he was forming himself as an artist, he just innately figured out that that was part of the gig, that that's what you had to do. And that cost him his life. If you've stuck so long, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Leave a comment below. This Lennon-McCartney relationship, Kurt's inability to work with other people effectively. Anything you have on your mind. If you want to help me out, please subscribe. I would like to grow a community here and to keep talking with people. Until the next time.